There is a fear that is deeper than bankruptcy, colder than grief, and more crushing than addiction. It is the fear that everything you have learned about life and about God is wrong. I spent most of my adult life building a fortress of certainties. I knew what was right, what was sin, what was success. I had a map of beliefs that guaranteed me a safe place in the world and in heaven. But when the desert came, when loss broke me, or addiction humiliated me, discovered the terrifying truth: the map did not work. My faith, which should have been my foundation, was merely a mask of knowledge that I wore to protect myself from the mystery. I was empty, not because I had failed in my actions, but because I had failed in direct experience, my dominator. Ego had turned faith into a consensual reality, a social agreement on how life should be. And that reality, full of rigid dogmas and expectations of perfection, could not withstand the cruelty of real life. What collapsed was not God, but my superficial belief about him. It is a moment of radical terror. You lose the ground, not just beneath your feet, but beneath your soul. If everything I knew was a lie, who am I now? This crisis is your calling. It is the universe forcing you out of the comfort of illusion and onto the threshold of truth. You can no longer be healed by what you were taught. You will only be saved by what you are about to experience. What if your only path to rebirth is to have the courage to be a spiritual novice, abandoning what you know to finally find what is? If what you have heard so far has already made you thoughtful, stay with me to reflect on this, and subscribe to the channel before you forget and miss the next voyages. The thinker Terence McKenna, in his essays on the Taxonomy of Illusion, warned that our greatest prison is not the visible walls, but the cultural illusion we accept without question. He saw society as a consensual reality, a set of agreements on what is real money, status, scientific, social success that blinds us to the depth of the mystery and the presence in our desert. This consensual reality manifests as the ego of control masquerading as spirituality. I was trapped in the illusion that if I just looked right, if I repeated the right words and followed the visible rules, I would be safe. But this performance faith was an empty shell. Addiction and grief, with their raw force, tore open that shell and exposed the void. The collapse of belief is the moment you realize that your spiritual life was, in large part, a performance for the consensual reality. You were concerned with how God was perceived by the other's external judgment, instead of how he was being experienced by you, internal truth. The end of personal time is not a date on the calendar. It is the moment your old map of certainties becomes irrelevant. The courage that McKenna so loved is not the courage of the warrior, but the courage of the seeker who ventures into the darkness without guarantees. It is the courage to admit, my old answers failed. I need a radical novelty, a direct truth. When you find yourself at this 0 point, you are ready for the Logos. The Logos is not a list of rules. It is the creative principle, the living word. Embracing the Logos is embracing the direct experience of God, which transcends what your ego can catalogue or control. The surrender at this new level is not surrender to suffering. It is surrender to the mystery. It is accepting that you do not need to know how grace will save you, only that she is salvation. The collapse of belief is painful, but it is the only way to demolish the illusion that was preventing your soul from breathing the truth. The collapse of belief left me in a terrifying place, the void. But, for the first time, it was a fertile void, not a sterile one. It was the space where the consensual reality had been evicted to make way for the direct truth McKenna advocated. For the primacy of direct experience, the idea that knowledge, of true value comes from direct confrontation with the mystery, not from inherited doctrines. In my rebirth, this became the difference between religion and faith. The religion I practiced was dogma, a set of rules and statements about God, mediated by third parties. It gave me social comfort, but it did not give me the strength to overcome addiction or endure grief. When the dogma failed, I thought God had failed. Faith, I discovered, is the direct experience of the Logos. It is the inner certainty, incommunicable and unquestionable, of the Lord's presence that is in you beyond any book or sermon. It is the novelty that God creates in you with every moment of surrender. The dominator ego loves dogma, because dogma is predictable, controllable, and requires no courage. It can be memorized. But the Logos, the living word, is unpredictable. It arises in silence, in raw pain, in vulnerable confession. It demands the total abandonment of your knowledge. I was trying to fix addiction and grief with the language of dogma, what I should do, and not with the language of experience, what I am feeling and what He is doing. This was the final illusion. The direct experience of God is the only antidote to addiction, because addiction is, fundamentally, a distorted search for direct experience, for ecstasy, for wholeness, for the interruption of pain. The addict seeks what McKenna would call something torn from us in paradise. The Logos is the true return to that paradise, without the cost of slavery. Grief, when based on dogma, tells us, accept it, because it is God's will. That is an intellectual answer. The direct experience of grief, through grace, tells us, feel the pain, because I am here in the midst of it, and your pain is not the end, but the portal to communion. The courage at this stage is to be undignified. It is the courage to reject religious performance in favor of the naked truth of your soul. It is the boldness to tell the others, my old beliefs did not save me, but what I am experiencing now is rebuilding me. The collapse of belief is not the end, but the beginning of your calling. It forces you to walk toward the presence unarmed, without the certainties of dogma as a shield. And it is in this total vulnerability that the Logos reveals itself in its fullness, not as a concept, but as a reality that your heart can feel and that your ego cannot refute. The end of personal time is the passage from dogma to the living truth. The collapse of belief and the shock of direct experience lead us to a final point, not of time, but of understanding, the personal eschaton in theology. The Eschaton means the end of times, the final destiny. McKenna saw the Eschaton not as a static judgment, but as a point of singularity in time, where novelty and complexity accelerate into infinity. It is the moment when history, as we know it, dissolves. In the desert of my end of personal time, this idea became my greatest hope. My addiction, my grief, my anxiety about the future were all products of a mind trying to break time, trying to maintain the security of the consensual reality and the old answers. The dominator ego dreads acceleration, because acceleration means losing control. But the Logos is, by nature, the acceleration of novelty. Accepting the personal Eschaton is having the courage to abandon what you know, because you understand that your yesterday's self is irrelevant to today's rebirth. It is an act of radical surrender to the flow of transformation. I was trying to fix my car, my life, by looking at the rear view mirror, the past and the dogma. But the Logos requires you to look to the future and accept the acceleration. Dogma, as rigid dogma and not the living word, acts as the brake that tries to stop novelty. It says, You must be this way forever. The calling, however, says, you must be new every day forever. Anxiety is the fear that the future will be worse than the past. The personal Eschaton is the certainty that the future will be radically different and that this difference is guided by the Lord's presence. Fear is the last illusion to be torn down. The direct experience of grace taught me that the ego has a finite life cycle. It is the structure that needs to dissolve so that novelty can ingress. Addiction is the attachment to that structure. The collapse of belief is its demolition. When you embrace the personal Eschaton, grief transforms into sacred memory and addiction transforms into constant vigilance and testimony. You stop being dragged by circumstances and become an active participant in your own continuous creation. The end of personal time is a gift. It is the opportunity to let your old, failed, and painful story be replaced by the unfinished, glorious story of the Logos. The collapse of belief does not just leave us empty, it leaves us responsible. The greatest irony of the consensual reality and rigid dogma is that they take away your personal responsibility. They offer a rulebook so that you don't have to think, feel, or make the radical surrender. They turn faith into a checkbox. But when you experience the personal Eschaton and see the Logos, face to face, when the Lord's presence becomes a direct experience and undeniably gain a new ethic. This is not an ethic of obligation. It is an ethic of gratitude and responsibility for the novelty created within you. McKenna asserted that the greatest good we can do is to bring back a new idea, because the world is threatened by the absence of good ideas. In our rebirth, the new idea we bring is the testimony that grace is more real than the illusion. This new responsibility is light. It is not the solitary burden of the dominator ego trying to prove its worth. It is the light burden of one who knows they are no longer in control, but are available to be used by the Logos. How does this new ethic manifest in grief? Ceases to be a repetitive refusal to accept loss and becomes a sacred remembrance that drives empathy and service to the others. Addiction ceases to be a moral failure and becomes a sign that your soul needs direct experience and communion, not substances or secrets. Doubt ceases to be a threat to dogma and becomes the courage needed to deepen your surrender to the mystery. The collapse of belief demolished the illusion that you needed to be perfect to be loved. The new ethic is based on the truth that you are loved in your imperfection. This new responsibility of truth transforms your life into a continuous calling. You are no longer hidden. You become a beacon, not by your inherent light, but because the Logos is being reflected on the surface of your transparent soul. The end of personal time did not end the world. It ended your old, painful world of lies and illusions, giving you the only task that matters, living the truth you have experienced. The collapse of belief and the shock of direct experience are intense, but the final outcome of surrender is surprising, profound joy. McKenna often spoke of Eros, the life force, the love for existence, the creative impulse that drives the universe toward novelty. The dominator ego and the consensual reality had crushed that Eros in me, replacing it with anxiety, obligation, and the void of consumption. Dogma, as I lived it, taught me to distrust joy. It told me that life was a constant battle against sin and that happiness was likely a distraction. But when you abandon what you know, the illusion, you become available to what is, and what is the creative Logos, which is the very source of joy. I stopped seeking salvation in grand events and began finding it in the small acts of communion and direct experience. The sunrise, the honest confession of a friend, the simple taste of a cup of coffee now, without the weight of addiction, but with gratitude. Joy is, in fact, the clearest symptom of your rebirth. It is proof that the personal Eschaton has happened, and you are no longer returning to the past. The courage to abandon what you know translates not only into grand acts, but into the courage to be grateful amidst imperfection. It is the boldness to love life, even with the scars of the fall. The Logos is not just the word that judges. It is the word that creates beauty. By attuning myself to the Lord's presence, I was not just avoiding hell. I was being invited to the feast of existence. This joy of Eros is what finally silences the fear of the future anxiety. If life is a manifestation of the novelty of the Logos, then tomorrow is not a threat. It is a promise of complexity and beauty that I cannot even imagine. The end of personal time is the door to eternal joy. You have walked the path from the collapse of belief, through the personal Eschaton to the joy of Eros. Your journey has proven that truth is not what you memorize, but what you live. The final plot twist of this narrative is simple. What you think you know about God is the last barrier between you and His presence. The dominator ego loves the illusion of rigid dogma because it promises control and clarity without the cost of vulnerability. But grace can only flow in direct experience. The responsibility of truth is your new light burden, to live in the novelty of every moment without trying to fit it into your old failed map. Your addiction and your grief were cruel, but honest messengers. They proved that the consensual reality of your life, your success, and your superficial faith could not